What's up, everybody? This is the Hard Things Podcast, episode 78, hosted by none other than myself, Blaine Burgess. Happy 2026 to you all out there. It's now January 20th. Last episode I recorded was before New Year's, and I've been taking a little bit of time, per usual, to kind of just let the creative process kind of unfold, and there's been a couple of weeks here where I've just tried to force an idea, and for whatever reason, I just, the source material wasn't kind of coming to me. I do think it has something to do with, just a few days ago, I was supposed to take chiropractic, national boards, the part 1 test. And so I've been studying for it for a few weeks, kind of refreshing myself on science stuff, things I've learned before. And then we show up Saturday morning, and due to a technical difficulty, nobody was able to take the test. So I think a lot of my focus has been there, and so the creative process was going on in the background. I did have some ideas, but basically this weekend after the test got canceled, I think the Eagle finally landed. So all the stuff I had kind of shoved off to the side, including this, has now come back around, and we're ready to go creatively. So at the end of last year, I kind of finished out a rough outline on my book, and that's definitely still marinating. And this creative process thing, it's just nothing that can be rushed. So I'm letting it happen. I don't understand it at all, but just letting it unfold. And so the example of the test and then giving myself space this weekend, allowing ideas to kind of flow back in, I realize I need probably more space. It's funny, the idea of space or not knowing. I think American psychology is we want to know things that are, things that exist. We want to be able to touch and feel it or have it in a spreadsheet. And what's interesting is the known universe is so small compared to the unknown universe, the space in between. If you look at an atom that makes up everything around us, there's more space than there are protons, neutrons, and electrons. So kind of making space for that unknown, if anything, is just kind of a creative focus of my own. I do credit the Buddhist magazine Tricycle for this idea too, because they always have meditation month, the month of January, and this whole meditation month, there's been a Korean monk who is talking about the sensation of not knowing, basically just doing all these meditations on not knowing and being okay with not knowing. In a capitalist kind of competitive society, to admit that you don't know something or to admit defeat or whatever is taken as a sign of weakness, and people kind of immediately write you off. But in reality, what I've seen at the other side of the coin is cooperation and space, lose the battle to win the war, is necessary. And it's what the people that succeed in life secretly, silently, maybe some people don't even try to hide it. They're just kind of anonymous and unknown. Unless you have a big public failure that people kind of blast on social media, You can fail. And then finally you get famous and you succeed. And then it looks like, oh my gosh, this guy's an overnight success. But I can tell you that that's kind of how I've existed. I've failed at a lot of things in my life, but all the skills and experience I have now are almost like nearly every tool in the tool belt for me being a chiropractor. The last two pieces I need are kind of scientific, like health knowledge, understanding how the body works, basically everything I was getting tested on in the Part 1 boards, and then also just like technical knowledge on how to adjust as a chiropractor, like all the modalities I'm going to do, not only knowing how, but then over time developing technical proficiency. Once I get to that level, I really do have everything I need. And like sales and business and organized athletics, all these things have given me immense insight and interpersonal skills that I think are going to help me, coach people back to health, or at least know when, something is in my control to help someone. If it's outside of my control, the only thing that's in my control in that situation is to make suggestions and then give space, allow space for change to happen. So once again, we come back to space. So what does that mean? I said all that to say, starting January 8th, I would have posted an episode. That episode is still on. And it's going to be kind of retroactively about JFK. That's today's episode. And then every 2 weeks, I'm going to post more episodes. It's going to get us all the way into April. So it won't be a weekly cadence. It's going to be a bi-weekly cadence. Just something new that I'm trying out. I think it's going to give me the space for writing. I don't know when I'm going to retake Part 1 boards. It's going to give me a space for that. I also need to get ready for the physiotherapy boards, which I can take starting in April, I believe. So, yeah, basically, I'm giving space for all these other projects while still keeping this one alive. I think last year I took a whole 90 days off. I also took a whole 90 days off of Olympic weightlifting. And my joints feel better. And the podcast, I took the time off and worked through some stuff that I was going through and came back to it refreshed and inspired. So now, I want to give time for myself in the creative process, but not only that, I want these episodes to be a little bit more in depth. Like today's episode is going to be, not as in depth as I probably would have hoped, because I'm trying to catch up. I want to be able to do this one, and then episode 2 of this series, will be episode 79. This weekend, get caught up, and then have that true 2 weeks. I'll post the next one like February 5th. So quick 1-2 punch, and then keep it moving. So the 1-2 punch is going to be JFK and MLK. And you're going to notice 2 things about them. Americans assassinated, and leaders. And not only that, but complete broad spectrum human beings. Very, very good actions, and also actions that kind of tarnish their legacy. And ultimately, being assassinated. I just think it's interesting when the universe, God, if that force plans things. These are two men who have a ton of streets named after them. They're remembered for being change makers. They're remembered for their missteps. They're remembered for the way they died. And it's just interesting that, I find myself thinking a lot about balance. So when someone is such a change maker, there's a universe balance to correct so we don't change too quickly. And then one way that the universe could do that is to remove these people from our presence. And so I wonder, would it be possible to have the same effect by just impeaching JFK, kind of have events lead up to that happening? Would it be possible, Martin Luther King was discredited in some way and ultimately, not assassinated, still alive, but maybe just, disgraced in some way. But then you think about it, if those guys were ever disgraced the way I'm talking about, their impact wouldn't have had, honestly, death is one of the only ways to remove them from the equation without negating what they did in their life. So I find it to be, it's just an interesting topic to me, because with our lives, I myself, I want to make a difference in people's lives. I want to cause change. I want to change the world for the better. And in that, you're going to have some negativity that crops up. But I also, respect the fact that the universe or God kind of tends toward balance. So how can I do this without upsetting the balance of the world? And maybe if the people I talk about in this series, including Gandhi, Malcolm X, Abe Lincoln, Caesar, and I think there'll be a little bit of John Lennon in an episode towards the end. I'm going to save the last person as a surprise. But a little bit sprinkled of John Lennon in there. So all these people were, cultural icons that were assassinated. And I just find the cases to be interesting. So that's what we're going to do. And this meditation is the seedling for book number 2 in the future. And I think for me, thinking about future books, if I have a trilogy of books that I want to put out, each book's going to kind of inform the other one in a way. It's not like book 1 leads to book 2, leads to book 3. I want them to be able to be read independently of each other. Hopefully people will read all 3. But I don't want them to be sequels necessarily. So similar topics, similar threads. If you read it, you can make your own connections. But that's kind of the vibe. So this is the seedling of book number 2. Book 1's kind of the book of desire, and I think this second book's going to be the book of safety. So this isn't necessarily me putting in chapters. This is me talking about some homies that were assassinated. So with that, I've stolen enough this first episode. It makes sense that this is first because this one happened right down the street from where I live. I'm talking to you live from Dallas, Texas, and this assassination was none other than JFK. It is interesting because yesterday was Martin Luther King Day. That's why he's coming later this week. Part of the inspiration. But JFK is assassinated in November. It's late last year. And I found myself at the end of 2025, feeling a little bit, just some things in my life had shifted. And Yeah, I always go back to this quote. I don't know if I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but everything I've ever let go, there's claw marks on it. I felt like 2025 was like a year of just claw marks. There's a lot of things that I either gave up or tried to give up just to see if it belongs in my life in the future. 2026 is going to be a year of rebirth as Dr. Burgess. Later this year, I'll be an intern in the Parker Clinic. In 2027, I'll have my chiropractic license. So, if this is the year of my rebirth, last year definitely was a death, like a metaphorical death. And I think that's why I'm meditating on these assassinations, because towards the end of last year, I was feeling the weight of that. And, I'd spent 35 years living, I guess, on my path. I mentioned how all the skills I obtained along the way, each individual one led me to here, and I need these skills to move forward. But I had been living in ways that weren't necessarily true to me. Even as far back, I think I've talked about before. But I got the opportunity to play football at Harvard when I was in high school, and I'd worked for that opportunity, but it wasn't hard. The opportunity came to me really without it was kind of a surprise. Not to say that it was easy for me, because I worked hard, but I loved playing football. I was happy dominating in school, and it didn't feel like a struggle. Like there was effort put in, but I didn't struggle. And I think we sometimes, to get back into capitalism and competition, we feel like we have to struggle to kind of earn something. So even as far back as then, I was like, wondering, why, like this, it was so easy for me to have this opportunity. And, I actually did have one other girl in my class that got to go to Harvard. But aside from her, not very many people get this opportunity. I kind of almost have to do it for the people that can't do it. I got to go see what this thing's all about. And one thing I wish I did too was explore the possibilities of Princeton and Yale, because even visiting, I had a visit scheduled to Princeton. The flight was purchased, and I canceled on them. And I really, to this day, don't know why. As just a reflex, I went to see Harvard, and I thought Boston was awesome. I thought Harvard was awesome, and I should have just at least saw the Princeton visit through, because eventually Princeton would beat our ass my, junior and senior years, and beat us out and tie us for Ivy titles those last couple of years. So, I kind of chose wrong. And like knowing that I made that mistake because I didn't even give it a chance. You gotta give it a chance. So that's a good lesson, but B, I wasn't necessarily living my path. I lived a path, one of my paths. I don't think it was my highest path though. I think I had some opportunities to go a different way at some point, and instead of accepting the challenge from the universe or from God, I stifled myself. And so luckily I still gained all the tools I needed for this opportunity now, but I think I'm just now at age 35 joining my highest timeline. And I believe this was about the time when JFK was elected president. I promise this is going somewhere. Oh, JFK was 43 when he was elected. But I think similarly to how I felt. Oh, I associated number 35 with him because he was the 35th president. That makes sense. Okay. But the whole reason I went on that whole tirade there was JFK, I have a feeling, becoming president wasn't necessarily a struggle. He came from the family in American politics, married to the right person, and just had a message for the American people that they needed at that time, they wanted, and being Catholic, I think played a big part. Irish American played a big part. He was kind of a new, fresh face, a little bit younger than maybe some of the, presidents of the time. And I just get the sense that it wasn't a struggle for him. I think what ended up being a struggle is once he got into office. And I say that because the amount of responsibility the President of the United States has is immense. But I see someone like Donald Trump, and I see him somewhat doing the bare minimum in terms of serving the people. He's serving, some of the people. But with JFK, I feel like he was genuinely trying to serve everyone. Now, I don't think it's possible to do that, but it seemed like a lot of the decisions he was making were to help a group of people and then to help the other, like it was just 50-50, help one group of people and then help the other group help the first group in a way. So it was all kind of beneficial, based in truth, and really, honestly, just the right thing to do. Because there's, political leanings where you kind of just serve half the population, and then there's the actual right thing to do. Sometimes it aligns, sometimes it doesn't. And I think, in a way, when you get the right thing and the views of your political party on board, and it does benefit the other half, that's when change kind of runs out of control in a positive direction. But with all that positivity, there's kind of an equal negative balance that becomes due. So there's a lot of ways that can manifest. It could be a war, like in this example, like the Bay of Pigs, kind of a little bit of an embarrassment. And then ultimately even his assassination. But there's also things like his reported infidelity, just a lot of things that were a negative kind of balance of the positive that he was doing. And it's not to say, like, I wrestle with this a lot, like, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do good. But it's how prepared are you for that balance when it comes back, and he also had a lot of documented health issues. I mean, I think he famously had Addison's disease, chronic GI and spinal issues, lots of pain, autonomic dysregulation, things that you could imagine would accumulate easily with the stress of a presidency. So you're doing all that good, and that, again, that negative manifests, and you kind of absorb that from the country. And the president is like the biggest place that happens. So in a way, you look at someone like Donald Trump, some of the negative stuff that he does, or the assassination attempt on him, he kind of naturally balances out himself. He does some good and then also like enough bad that he's only been, attempted assassination once, and I think he's someone that's changed a lot in our country too. So anytime you're affecting change, and in this case, I think we swung with Barack Obama like too far liberal, so now he's bringing it back conservative, and those big swings are kind of part of the problem. Like, you want to be more balanced if you can be. So having our two-party system and going back and forth between the two creates turmoil. I think JFK, being a Democrat, but also rooted in Catholicism, he had an opportunity maybe to be a more balanced individual if his body could have handled it. And to rope it back into chiropractic, having those back issues and everything, I think he just wasn't able to put a bridle on that horse and a saddle. He was riding a wild stallion, and you need to saddle that bad boy. And again, this is just from reading about him. Nothing. I'm by no means a JFK expert. It's just this is just my opinion. Because he's a young guy and creating a lot of change. I look at it as a great example. I think we can learn from those that came before us. So I'll tell you what I take away from it. A lot of the negatives that happened were him just being human, trying to get a handle on this energy, creating positive change, absorbing negative energy, and not being able to transform it, not having the technology, the understanding to do this. I'm not saying any human can ever be perfect, and I don't expect myself to be perfect. But I do see opportunities that he had. In terms of infidelity, I mean, that's just sexual energy misplaced. And with all of the pain he had in his back, your sexual system is innervated by your sacrum. So not to say that chiropractic could have fixed JFK and helped him live better, but maybe. Who knows if he was getting that kind of care. I have no idea what his care regimen was like, but I think I believe there has to be a way that each and every person, like I said, like, what was easy for me was to play football and get into Harvard. What was easy for JFK was to become president. That's just based on who he was born as, opportunities, whatever. But this was his path, he was supposed to be walking in. That's why it was so easy. But no matter how big the stakes are, like being president or just me going to Harvard, becoming a chiropractor, and potentially influencing this profession, both are important jobs in the context of mankind. And that includes your janitor, or it includes the maid, or, just think of the blue collar job. Those people are important too, because they're probably someone's mother or father. And it may not be their children, but their children's children become, a local leader, city council member, whatever, you name it. Those people born into those situations oftentimes work really hard and work their way out of situations. You just never know who that person's going to be. So not only should we treat people well, but just understand that it doesn't make you less than. I think that's what competition really does to us, is it dampens our ability to see people for their potential value. And every single human, as long as you have a heartbeat, has the potential to improve your situation. And honestly, stress hormones, whether it's the presidency, which is probably the ultimate form of stress hormone, maybe the most consistent delivery of them, or even just someone like a McDonald's worker at a, McDonald's that is super busy all day, you never take a breath. If they enjoy it, they're going to go home tired and sleep well. If they don't enjoy it, they're going to be absolutely miserable, maybe the same way JFK was at times. And maybe even have the same back problems, the same, disease. So it's an interesting exercise to think about, no matter a person's external circumstances, internally, we're all very similar. And so I think when I also think of what's in my control, I can make sure my body's in good shape, so my chemistry's in good shape, so I can react to situations better. And know that although the good in my life may not have as much impact as, say, the President of the United States, that doesn't mean it's not important. And in the same vein, if I do negative things, it's a big deal. Just because my positive impact isn't as great as the president doesn't mean that my screw-ups don't matter either. That I can just do what I want. It all matters. If you're here on this earth and you have life in your body, it matters. So that's kind of the point. I start to think about these assassinated folks. And that's it. And I think a lot of people just want to matter. So I can tell you do matter. They're afraid that we won't matter, or that what we do here on earth won't matter. And I'll give it back to JFK for this last little bit. The only thing that we have to fear is fear itself. That's one of his favorite famous quotes, and I think about it often. Fear makes us do things outside of our character. It makes us make massive mistakes that remove us from our highest timeline. I think in a way, to take it back to me and that decision to go to Harvard, if I visited Princeton and I liked it too, I was afraid to make a mistake and choose the wrong one. And that actually caused me to not go to Princeton and not even give myself a chance to maybe make a better decision. That's a thing. I can't even go back and tell you Princeton was right because I never went. I know the right decision was to give myself an option. And then maybe if they offered someone else and rescinded my offer at Harvard, maybe I would go to Yale or Brown, or, I could have gone to any Ivy at that point because I was getting recruited by the top 3. So instead of feeling scarcity or being afraid, I should have created space. And I guess that's the lesson for today, maybe the title of the episode. So, if you find yourself being fearful, that fear is never going to go away. And I'm sure JFK was afraid. And ultimately, in the end, one of the worst things that could happen happened to him. It happened to him in front of his wife, which is even more mortifying. I know as a man, it's already mortifying for me to die, but then more mortifying is to leave people behind, especially someone that counts on me. So the worst ended up happening to him, and it was out of his control. And any fear he felt, any struggles he had with his health, didn't matter. His fear didn't matter. The ending was the ending. But I do think he had some meat on the bone in terms of getting to his highest timeline, not allowing things like infidelity to creep in, handling situations like the Bay of Pigs maybe differently. It's an example left behind. His life matters. His example matters. Take the good, take the bad, learn from it. And that's a lesson I don't have to learn. And I can't necessarily learn, because if I was assassinated, I wouldn't be able to change anything after that. I would no longer have my own choice. So anyways, that's going to be the gist of these upcoming episodes. Next one will probably be later this week with MLK. I'm excited for that one. Until then, see you guys next time.